Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is One Day Today. So good to be with you all. So this one, I think I'm going to start with, the word trauma. We talk about that a lot in this space. What is trauma? And what is, we all have an experience in our lives. We want to believe we're young and we have this dream of I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a musician. I want to be a rock star. Whatever it is we want to do, we imagine and we want there to be just like this linear path to get to what we want to do. And in reality, life is a series of mountains and valleys. And it's like, and it's never quite in the moment when we really know. Sometimes we're in the midst of a valley and don't even realize we're climbing a mountain, and we're actually just there's something that I discovered, and I want Matthew and to share what he's seen here too. But one of the things that really opens up is that I've discovered in this space is that no matter where we're from, what color or creed we are, we all have experiences in our lives that impact us. These experiences that rock our world, that turn it upside down. And it can be painful, it can be suffering, it can make us feel alone and afraid and scared. But everybody who has shared on this stage, every amazing human I've met, always has something that they discovered at the bottom of that valley that allowed them to really be at the top of the mountain and to bring others with them, and to find something beautiful that lights them up and gives them purpose and allows them to contribute their gift to others. And and I believe, and this is my belief, but I believe it's very universal, and Matthew says this all the time, and that we've embraced, is that on the other side of trauma lies wisdom and also beauty and self-discovery. And that's what this space is about. And I'm really excited. I'm going to introduce her in a moment, but our guest today is up to some amazing work in this field of, empowering people's trauma, over their trauma. And it's just I'm really excited to have Susie with us, and we'll introduce her shortly. But first, let me welcome our co-host, Matthew. Is it afternoon yet? Afternoon, brother.
It is.
He's
yes,
in Hawaii,
5 minutes.
You're muted.
Officially in the afternoon. What?
Well,
It
I just
doesn't
want
say I'm
to
muted.
speak to the whole conversation of trauma.
Well, first of all, can you hear me?
The whole conversation of trauma, though, I'll just say this now. It's the opportunity and the obstacle, and I think that is like kind of a paradigm that we all
test.
In the deepest valleys of my life, when I felt so alone, when I felt so afraid, when I was, I just felt like a different, and when I was a victim mentality, when I was bullied for being overweight, like when I was in that space, it wasn't an opportunity. It was just a scary thing of my life's happen. I'm at the effect of life. I'm living life by chance. And it really took, really looking at those things that were painful and what the story was that I made up about it. It's like, maybe life isn't as scary as I've told myself it is. Maybe I don't need to protect this little scared little boy that I was because of the things that happened to me. And I think that's an opportunity that, like every trauma we face, every scary situation we face is an opportunity to go beyond it and just discover something beautiful that we couldn't have even seen if we hadn't gone through that pain and that sorrow or that suffering.
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
You're still muted.
I'm not muted.
I'm a little surprised because it was literally working right before we began.
Okay, now? No?
Just speak in sign language. It's fine. You can, or Morse code. So, well, I think this is a good time because Matthew's going to join us in the conversation after Susie introduces herself. But I think this is a good time to welcome to the stage our guest today. It's such an honor and privilege to have. So maybe it's just me that I can't hear. Well, let's invite Susie to share. So I want to welcome to the stage Susie Schaefer.
Hi, and thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you. So, Abram, I think your audio cut out is what happened. I don't think he can hear either one of us, Susie. So I'm going to
no.
message him real quick. Yeah, I think he lost sound entirely is what I think happened.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Can you hear me, Susie?
Oh yeah, I can hear you great. Loud and clear.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, while Abram deals with his audio problem, I'm just going to let you get to it. Susie, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And I have to say, Abram's monologue was really good. So I was very enthralled by listening to him. So my name is Susie Schaefer. I'm founder of Finish the Book Publishing, and I help authors create books that get results and give back. So there's a lot that goes into that bucket. So one of the first things that I'll talk a little bit about is about the ability for people to write books and share their stories can also heal your trauma. So Abram was talking about trauma. And I think everybody has trauma at some point in their lives. For me, it was getting divorced and realizing that codependence was not necessarily a positive thing. And I learned out of my wisdom from that experience how to be independent and not be codependent, and realize that I could actually build a business and be self-sufficient on my own and heal the trauma at the same time. So for me, that was part of my story and coming through that. And what I do by helping other people tell their stories is get them published so that they have a book that goes along with their business, that creates social impact and creates community about what they do and who they are. So yeah, Matthew, are you there?
I am here, and I can actually
Okay.
unmute myself this time.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So let's start the conversation about that, because really, Abram was talking about trauma, and trauma is one of those things that it sneaks up on people. A lot of times people don't even realize that they might be in a trauma scenario. And when you do realize it, or you do come through that, there's things that you have to do to kind of heal that so that you can move forward. Otherwise, you're going to drag that. It's like filling up a backpack with all kinds of, water bottles and having to drag it with you everywhere you go. It's heavy and it'll slow you down. So by healing that trauma, it allows you to grow, have personal growth, personal empowerment, and figure out, where do I want to go in this world?
Yeah. One of the ways I've come to look at trauma over the last few years or so is trauma. So if we start with the idea that every one of us has an authentic self, that that call it the soul, call it a higher self, call it spirit, call it whatever you want. But just if we start with that idea, and that is something that very much resonates to me. I don't know if it's true, but it definitely resonates. Trauma is simply being disconnected from that authentic self. And that can happen in a multitude of ways. Like you were saying, it can sneak up on you. A lot of times it just happens in childhood. Sometimes it can be as simple, like for me, one of the biggest ones was accepting the reality that other people told me. Like it just accepting what other people told me is true, and then living my life as if that was true. That was a huge trauma, and I'm still working through that one, like still. And so if trauma is simply being disconnected from our authentic self, then healing trauma is simply learning to reconnect our authentic self.
Yeah. And I think that when you do reconnect to your authentic self, you then have to process, transmute what it was that created the trauma, and then forgive yourself so that you can move forward, because that's all part of that process. But it's really interesting. We are going through right now a global awakening. People are realizing that there's a lot of mistruths in the world, and sometimes the story that we've been living may or may not have been true. And so people are finding truth. They're seeking what is reality versus non-reality. What is a facade in the way we live our lives, and the relationships and connections we have. And so I think that's all part of this big awakening that we're going through. And when people can find their inner self, their inner voice, their spirit, soul, and they start listening to that versus all the chatter on the outside that goes on, it's really amazing, because suddenly you realize what's true for you and what's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually mentioned something earlier in that that I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to, and it's the idea of transmuting. So
Mhm.
when you say transmuting, like what I hear is finding meaning, like learning lessons. Is that kind of what you're pointing at, or is there something deeper?
For me, it's about learning the lesson. Like, what is the lesson that I'm supposed to get out of this? Like, what that's the big question, right? And then transmuting that so that you can say, okay, I've learned that lesson. How do I not let that repeat? Because when you transmute something, in this is my opinion, of course, it allows you to recognize it without having an attachment to it, so that you can allow that to just dissolve, but understand that you're still gonna it's still gonna happen for you. For example, um, someone had once described our lives are like a spiral going up. Okay, as we go up the spiral, you will hit on that point of trauma, and when you do the work, you come around to that, you're going to hit that same point on the spiral as you've gone up. But if you're learning the lesson and you're transmuting that energy to where it's not stuck in you as an emotional craw, then as you come up the spiral, you recognize the lesson, but you also know, okay, I know what to do better this time. And every time you hit that same trauma point on that spiral, if you're doing the work, it becomes easier and you recognize it and it pops up in front of you and say, aha, I see you. You're not going to have the same effect on me this time around. So, and truly, when I work with authors, that's one of the things that we like to do is make sure that they're recognizing what is that trauma and how do you transmute that? How do you get past it? How do you recognize it? But it doesn't affect you emotionally anymore.
Right. But how can you do that and still be able to speak authentically in a way that in a way that other people actually hear you? So that's
I think it's learning that that trauma does not define you. It yes, it is part of your life experience, absolutely, but it doesn't define you. If I were defined by my divorce and by my leaving a marriage that was no longer serving me and that was not healthy, if I let that define me, I would be in this victimhood for the rest of my life. So by transmuting that and by doing the work, the inner work, the work on myself, the work on my inner child, all of the shadow work, all that stuff, the getting, diving deep into that. By doing that work, it allows me to say, sure, that's an experience that happened in my life. I learned from it, but it doesn't define me.
and that brings us to the deeper question of, well, what am I? Which is that idea of the authentic self. And there was like you mentioned the spiral, and this actually brought up something that I saw this. I don't remember how this came to me. There's this little vision I had a while back where I actually saw life as a funnel,
Mm-hmm.
and at the bottom of the funnel is our authentic self, our true self, our source, whatever. And as we're born, we start to learn all of these things. And the more we learn, the more we accept these things as true, we start speeding up in this funnel. And the faster you go in the funnel, the higher up the funnel you get, and the further away from your authentic self you actually are. And so, these events, like, they exist still in the funnel. And so as you're coming around, you hit them over and over and over again, like you were saying. And then eventually, with at least some of us, and maybe even most of us now, because I feel like you mentioned this great awakening that we're going through. I absolutely feel that too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're starting to get to these places where we actually hit things that slow us down in the funnel. And so we come across maybe a conversation like this where it reminds us that, oh, we don't have to identify with trauma. We don't have to identify with pain. We don't have to respond with anger or to anger with anger. We can choose a different way. And I feel like as we kind of find those little things, they slow us down. And as we slow down, we start dropping down the funnel again. And we start getting closer and closer to our authentic self. So I really appreciate that. And I wonder, like, does that resonate with you? And if so, what are some of the things that you have hit in your funnel that have slowed you down?
Yeah, so I think it does for sure. And I think everybody kind of sees it a little bit differently. There's so many different models out there that can kind of explain it. So I would encourage your viewers to just find the one that resonates with you, because they're all a little bit different, and it's okay. That's totally okay. That's our own individual uniqueness, which is great. So there's two things that you mentioned that I want to comment on, and the first is perspective, because trauma, when you've gone through trauma, you have a certain perspective about it, and it's kind of like transmuting, but it's bigger than that. So when you have perspective about that trauma, it can change the way you look at it. And it's the same thing like if you were to look at your car from the front angle versus your car from the side angle. They look different, right? It's the same car, but it looks different to you because your perspective is different. So sometimes it's important when you're dealing with trauma to look at it from a different perspective. So I think that's important, and that kind of talks a little bit about that spiral, about where you're at on the spiral, and if it's slowing you down or not. And I don't feel like the spiral is necessarily about speed. It's, for me, more about quality. Like, are you spending that quality time with yourself to figure out what's the source of the trauma? How did I respond to it? Like all of those things. And then how do I move past this? Not let it identify who I am, not let it be attached to me. But also honor that piece of it, because it is part of your story. So, and that's what connects us as humans, right? The other thing is response. So we all have the ability to make choices with how we respond to certain situations. So whether it's trauma or a non-trauma situation, how you respond to that, I think, is going to dictate how you're going to move forward, or are you going to stay stuck in there? Is that pattern going to keep coming up for you, or are you going to be able to respond in such a way that you can say, okay, great, I'm now emptying some of those water bottles in my backpack, because my response is different this time around when that same thing comes up for me than it was 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago.
I love the simplicity of perspective. And what keeps coming up for me, and this is something I use a lot, but this is a beautiful metaphor and analogy, kind of from what you're describing, is how life is like a garden, and our thoughts are like they are what we water. Whether we water, it's the concept of weeds. Weeds are plants that I learned this beautiful wisdom from my mom. I was reminded of it not too long ago, where I was talking. She is an amazing gardener. And I was asking her about weeds, like what she does with the weeds. And she's like, well, all the weeds are just the plants that we think are ugly. And I think this is when our lives are gardens, like when we can see each thought, each experience we have is like what we will see as a flower or as a weed, as something ugly or something beautiful. But what we get to do as a gardener of our life is we can actually display this something that was ugly, something that was painful, that's traumatic, as something that not only does not invoke pain anymore, but actually is beauty for others, and right. and actually invites them to discover where the flowers are in their experiences of weeds.
I really like that as an example, because it reminds me of the dandelion. So the dandelion, in most, American cultures, we see it as a weed, because you don't necessarily want those dandelions in your perfect green grass, right? But the dandelion is actually one of the most nutritious and healthy plants on the planet. And so we look at it as being a weed, and we try and get rid of it. We try and kill it. We try and mow it. We try and pull it. We try and poison it. But really, we should be embracing that, because it's truly something that's very, very healthy for all the plants, the earth, everything around us, and even ourselves as humans. So, right. So that's that perspective thing. I mean, if you stop calling it a weed, then and you realize, oh wow, this is a really blessed piece of nature, it takes on a whole new meaning.
Right, absolutely, and it's like when we water, it's like and like our thoughts and experiences, whether we water or water our thoughts from if it's love or if it's fear, whatever we water is going to grow.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
we can water a weed that's ugly and invokes pain and fear, and it's like, and we'll get that if we focus on it.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a good point too. So many times people, because of their response to trauma is fear, either fear of going down that path again, or fear of, am I good enough? Like that, those types of self-limiting beliefs. And I think if you can get to the other side of fear, it's so much easier to work through the trauma and come out the other side feeling a little bit more like a whole person versus, letting it sit there and simmer. So yeah, getting past fear is huge. And I hope that this today inspires people to look at the root cause of your fear. Is it trauma based? If it is, do the work, and try and get past that fear, because it will speed things up for you by leaps and bounds.
That's one of the biggest things I've been looking at recently is fear. And something that I've like this concept I've been playing with is the idea of moving out of fear-based decision making and into choosing from love.
Right.
And this may be a bit oversimplistic, but when I really look at the society we live in today, especially Western society in particular, and I look at all of the axioms and assumptions and beliefs that have contributed to how it exists in this exact moment, I have yet to find one that wasn't a fear-based decision. Like when I really dig down on them, every single one has been, it was chosen out of some level of fear from the very get-go. And there's a couple of really key assumptions that I have kind of honed in on. One of them being the idea that we live in a world of scarcity, that there are not enough resources to go around. And because there's not enough resources to go around, there has to be some way to distribute resources fairly. And the only way to do that is through some level of competition. And therefore, we have chosen work as this level of competition in order to prove that you are worthy of receiving limited resources. So like that's one building block. And then another one comes from, actually, as far as I can tell, the farthest I've been able to trace it back is St. Paul in his letter to the church at Thessalonica, when they were asking about, well, we've got all these people who are coming and living here and they're not working. So like we're having to feed them, but they're not contributing. And Paul wrote back, well, if a man doesn't work, neither shall he eat. And that was absolutely true in that context. The church at Thessalonica was a commune. They had a particular mission they were working towards. And they had, they literally did have limited resources in that particular case. And so like, if you weren't working towards that mission, then you didn't really need to be there in the first place. And there were plenty of other ways you could go out and find food to eat besides just, mooching off the church. And so but that one phrase, it seems like has been taken out of so much context. And now we have this entire culture of, well, you work so you can eat. And the question I have to that is, well, what are you working towards? And is it something you actually find meaningful? Is it actually something you really want to put into this world? And if it's not, then what are you working there for?
Right.
Like if you're not building something, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that's a very good point. And I think when people realize that if you are not loving the work you do and the work is not loving you, then you need to change something, because what you're really doing is simply enslaving yourself to put food on the table, that's not living. That's not living. So, you've got to kind of dig deep. And I think that's the blessing with the pandemic that actually happened for a lot of people, is they suddenly had to really dig deep and give it thought about, do I enjoy what I'm doing for work? Or is my work just, is it taking over my life? And
am I only doing it because it's the only way it's the only way I see that I can put food on the table?
Survival. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it just for survival?
Right. So if you do what you love, okay, there's a book, Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. But if you are doing what you love, or at least if what you're doing is coming from a place of love versus fear and abundance versus scarcity, your entire life will change. And guess what? The trauma that you've been through, regardless of what that is or how long ago it was, you will transmute that trauma much, much faster if you are just in a place of love and abundance. It changes everything. So yeah. And one of the things that I recommend when I work with people is that if they're not already doing a meditation practice, to start. It does not take a lot of time. A lot of people think, I can't take an hour to meditate. Okay, I don't meditate an hour. 10 to 20 minutes is all you need. And after you are done meditating, some people use guided meditations. You can find them all over the place. Some people will just listen to music. But when you allow yourself that quiet time with your inner being, it's amazing what comes up for you. And then when you are done meditating, journal some things, write some things down. What came up for you during that time? Because I can guarantee you that what's coming up for you is either coming from a place of fear or a place of love, and you have to decide which direction you're going to go. Is it coming from scarcity or abundance? And so if you've got things that are coming up like scarcity and fear, then those are obviously some things that need a little bit of work.
Yeah. I love that, how you connected those dots, because I was reminded inadvertently about the power of meditation the other day, where I was in the shower, and I was like, it was a busy day. I had a lot of things in my mind, and it was like this space where I was just, I gave myself, I was just meditating in the shower, and it was like the rest of the day it was like listening to my body as opposed to my mind. It was like, and it allows me to distinguish. It's like, oh, there's thinking and there's thoughts, and those are going to happen. But it was like, but also when I was tapped into my body, like these new ideas, these new inspirations came from like an intuitive source,
right,
rather than I need to do A plus B to get to C. It wasn't
right,
like it was just a natural flow. And then I had these like, oh, I could do this. And like, I had like, all of a sudden I had all these solutions to all these things that my mind was stressed about. And it was like, and I think to what you're saying is like having a practice to have that space is what allows us to get into our body, which allows us to choose to operate from love rather than get stuck in the fears of the mind, which will always be there, because that's why the mind exists, is for survival.
exactly.
You know?
And it's interesting because when you were in that meditative state, you were tapping into your heart chakra, okay? Which when you tap into your heart chakra and you allow the intuition to flow, then of course you're activating your third eye and your crown chakra as well. So when you're getting the intuition that comes to you, everybody has intuition, by the way. Like people think, oh, I don't have it. You have it. You just don't know how to activate it and you don't know how to use it. So doing things like chakra balancing meditations, really tapping into that and allowing yourself, the information will flow. When you open that up, intuition will just start firing for you. And then you'll be like, oh, I have these great ideas. But guess what? The ideas are not coming from your brain. It's coming from your higher self, which is activated through your heart chakra. So it all, we're all connected. We just happen to live in these bodies. Okay. But our spirit, our soul is connected to our higher source. So by using meditation and journaling, because I find it fascinating when I go back and look at my journal from a year or two ago. It is amazing. I was a completely different person 2 years ago. And so I look at that and I read that and I'm like, wow, I have really been doing the work. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it because you're still doing your day to day, right? You're still getting up, brushing your teeth, meeting with clients, doing your work, doing what you have to do. My days go by very fast because I love what I do and I love who I work with. But when I look back at it more of a time space kind of thing, and I look back at journals from a couple of years ago, it is amazing. I'm like, wow, I am totally different person. Even some of the goals that I had 2 years ago, are no longer goals, because my goals have now, we moved the goalpost because,
Right.
I've already surpassed the goals I had 2 years ago. So, using meditation and writing, any kind of journaling, writing, really helps you tap into your inner self and that intuition that's going to help guide you and make sure that you're on the right path.
And it's funny, like you talk about 2 years ago. Like, if I look back at where I was 2 years ago, 10 years ago, I could never imagine having a conversations like this. Like,
Right.
I was, I moved to Hawaii in 2010, and I identified as like straight up atheist, naturalist. There is no God. There is no spiritual. Science explains everything. There is a natural explanation. There is no woo-woo at all, none whatsoever.
I love that. No woo at all. Now it's like
no woo.
complete opposite, right? Now you're like,
I see a woo with a red X,
oh.
like no woo allowed.
Yeah.
Like, oh, now it's all about the woo, right?
Exactly.
And this is part of the awakening that we're going through, is that people are now starting to understand, oh, there's more to it, the woo, than I realized.
Yeah.
I thought it had to be, specifically God in a box, church,
Well, that's
those
exactly
kinds of things. And it's so much bigger than that.
It is. And for me, that's what this really lights me up, is like this whole concept, like what Matthew's trying, like the extremes of woo woo and scientific and spirit, like they're two different conversations. And to me, there is an amalgamation where both extremes are missing the point. And I was like, I've even talked to Matthew about this, like kind of like a conversation, like we were like kind of talking about some like distinguishing, like with humor, like the extremes of the identity and the ego. And like you could have two people in a room, just like one person is like extreme spiritualist, like it's like hey guys, I just got back from aligning my chakras and about to do some yoga. I'm right now it's Mercury retrograde, so I'm having a hard day, and I'm a Libra, so I think I have this, and I'm about to go get, it's like you could go down that path for like hours and like be so enlightened, and at the same time you could have somebody it's like, yeah, so I just read a dissertation on the experience of quantum mechanics and how the implications of star systems and how it impacts the water molecules on Mercury, and how that actually affects the impact of how it's like you could get lost in these you get stuck in its extreme identities either way.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. They're not disconnected. They're actually, science and woo are connected. They are part of one. And so
there's two different languages.
Exactly. So one is coming from, again, like the heart chakra, one's coming from the brain. Okay. So, and if you understand that the heart and the brain are actually connected, like physically in your body, they are connected. Your brain powers your heart and your heart powers your brain. So when you look at things woo versus science, and you're like, oh, but they're connected. And what happens to molecules in water when you intentionally give that water love? It changes energetically. It is a scientific proof that this can happen. So what happens when you sing to your plants and you show your plants love? They do better. What happens when you wake up first thing in the morning and you say, I'm going to have a fabulous day. I'm so excited about it. You're setting an intention. That intention, even though it's a woo thing, you're actually changing the energetic molecules in your sphere. So it might be woo, but it's actually science.
I wonder real quick if we could just go around the circle and share an example, because like there's one that immediately comes to mind for me. One of my best friends, we traveled the island together for a couple of years, and she had this thing with her garden. She would always set aside one little corner, and she would go and spend a day talking to all the insects. And she'd tell all the insects, this is your corner of the garden. You can eat whatever you want here. It's all yours. I'm planting this just for you. But see all this over here? I'm planting this for me, and I would really appreciate it if you would leave it alone, because this is for my nutritious health. This is my. There would be not a single bite on her side of the garden. Like the plants that she planted just for the bugs would be eaten up, and they loved it. Like the plants on that side would still grow like crazy. Like they wouldn't die. It was amazing. But like no herbicides, no pesticides, no nothing. She just talked to the bugs.
Mhm.
And I watched it work every single day.
Yep.
Okay, science, answer that one right now. And they're trying. They are. And I feel like I'm starting to see the conversations between science and spirituality merge.
Right. Yeah.
And I really love that. But like, I wonder if you two have an example like that of something that just like really like took your breath away and was like, oh, there's more here.
Oh, there's a lot. Let me think of specific. You go first, Susie.
I'm trying to think of something specific, but that's actually research that's being done right now, is how science and how science and spirituality are actually merged in your DNA. So that's something that is actually being explored and written about and talked about. And so it's amazing what we have coming our way as far as learning more about planet we live on and how it works and all these other fun things. I think it's pretty amazing. This awakening is what is sparking this. And so people are open to having these kinds of conversations because it's changing our perspective. And when we change our perspective, then of course we come back to that. It gives us the opportunity to have a different response. So one of the things I practice every day is prayer with my food. So every day that I sit down to a meal, I say a prayer over that food, that it will help my body be the healthiest it can be, and that it will be nutritious and serve me in the highest good. So that prayer over my food will keep me healthy. And I mean, literally, I could probably eat dirt and just be like, if I prayed over it, I know it would be good for me, right? So it's about the setting the intention, because I know that when I pray over that food, it changes the scientific makeup of that food so that it is doing its best good for my body.
I love it. So there's so many, like, well, the first thing that came to mind was there's this quote, I don't remember who said it, and it's total paraphrasing, but like when scientists and earth and metaphysical scientists reach the top of the mountain of like knowledge, they'll see that theologians have already, like, will already be at the summit with, like, they're basically like, and that's the thing is, it's funny because biblical texts and scripture were not written as books of science,
right?
And they were writing how to live, like, I would say every ancient scripture or teaching that has been in civilization was always how to live and not suffer, and how to love. It's like in some form, like, it's overgeneralization, but basically it's how to suffer the least in a world that has malevolence and fear, and how do we live, and and just that science is catching up to the spiritual discoveries of thousands of years ago, and how knowledge and the idea of knowledge has become this grandiose thing in society. It's like knowledge is power, and for me, it's like we're only able to, the knowledge that we attain as a civilization is only able to go as far as we imagine, and we create art and spirit. It's like an amalgamation of those worlds, and that's where I get lit up, is because it's always art, or not art, but religion versus science, and in the same vein. And it's like, and I see it as two parts of the same coin. And so there's so many things, and just like meditation, and but you're speaking about prayer, like, it makes so much sense to me that if we pray before we eat, why we would digest food better, and why we would get more energy and nourishment, because it's like, it is the intentionality of us being connected with what we eat. And that's it makes sense to why Native Americans who would when they killed an animal, they would honor it, and they would, like, and everything was sacred, and it would have an impact on them, on their nutrition, but also their well-being, in honoring and gratitude, and how when so it's like it's
Yeah.
so funny because it's you could talk about the woo woo, but it's like oh, those crazy people do that one tradition that like, oh, good luck with those prayers, and like, you know, it's like I hear a lot of scientists talk about like, well, praying makes no difference. So it's like, so you're telling me if you were really clear on what it is that you're committed to, deep down, not like surface, I want $1 million, but like I want to experience joy and beauty, and I want to listen, and I want to see, I want love in my, I want to give plant seeds of love with my neighbor. I want to be surrounded by beauty in every space I exist. You're telling me if you said that to yourself every day, that it wouldn't move the needle, and you wouldn't find and notice and attract situations like that. And it's like, it's so oversimplified to say it's like, oh, there's nothing to learn in that. And like, I used to be that too, where I was like, I never had spirituality growing up. It was always just like this other world that I didn't understand. And I think it's both communities, or all communities, are missing out when it's just summing up as like, oh, that's just some weird thing that they believe based on this boogeyman book that they read. And it's like, well, I would challenge you to say, well, like, what could I learn? Maybe in this infinite vast universe, I don't know everything, and maybe there's something I can learn, especially from the things that I don't understand or don't agree with. Like, why do I disagree with them?
And that's a really good point. So, you know, we can say it can be woo or it can be science, but then when you blend the two together, what do you have? And this is I'm going to take this full circle now, because this is where it's going to get really interesting. So when you blend the two, you have science and you have woo, and you're like, oh, wow. So love, the vibration of love, the energy of love can actually help things grow. It can help change the food you eat. It can honor the animal that you had to sacrifice. So it does all these things. So what is that saying? That is saying that you are balancing the energy. So because you can say kill an animal to eat food, but because you're blessing it and you're honoring that animal that you're sacrificing simply for, sorry, my that you're sacrificing to nourish your body, knowing that it's part of the cycle of life, you're creating balance. So let's take that back to trauma. So if you have trauma in your life and you haven't dealt with it, you're out of balance. And, you know, we talked about, you know, doing chakra balancing and things like that, because, you know, it's about energy. It's about moving the molecules to make the energy flow better for you. So that trauma response and your perspective on the trauma, if it hasn't been dealt with, then you're probably out of balance. That's kind of like the long way around. But, you know, you think about that and it's like, oh, wow, you know, do I want to keep carrying around that backpack with all the water bottles in it? Or is it time for me to drink the water, which is healthy for me, and lighten the load on my back?
I really appreciate that one, because it is like the experiences that we perceive as traumatic really are some of the most nourishing things that we can experience.
Yeah.
It's like those dandelions.
Yeah, just like dandelions. Some of the best teachers in my life has not been a pleasant experience. Some of the best teachers were awful to me, but that's okay because I learned from them.
Yeah,
so,
we never learn from our successes. We actually only can't really learn from our failures.
Yeah, and the people that we have difficult relationships with, or there's trauma around that, guess what? That's probably one of your best teachers, one of your best learning moments. If you learned the lesson. If you didn't learn the lesson, then guess what? When you go back on that spiral and you hit that again, you're going to have to learn that lesson again. You're going to have to, that's karma. You're going to have to repeat that lesson and repeat it until you figure out, oh yeah, if I drink the water in the backpack, it nourishes me and lightens my load. So that's the lesson. So you just, every time then you get to that point, you're like, oh yeah, drink the water, nourish myself, lighten the load.
Yeah, I love that. And like a relationship, you know, toxic, like I've had a toxic relationship where, you know, I discovered, you know, it was difficult, but I discovered my own codependent cycle, and I'm grateful for it. Like I would have still been on that spiral if I hadn't discovered that. And it's something that, and I think this is in the list. This is the perspective. Like how do we listen to the obstacles in our life? And like I've used this example. Is it a speed bump or is it a ramp to fly to the moon? You decide. It's really you decide.
Yeah, and you're right, because everybody has some type of trauma in their life. If you say you don't, then you probably aren't looking hard enough, because everybody does.
It could be the littlest thing. It could be the littlest thing. It could be on my drive to work. This when I pass this cemetery and it brings up bad memories, or it could be anything.
It could be not feeling loved as a child. It could be getting a bad grade in school. It could be anything. So, but when you go back and you work on those things and you figure out, gosh, what are the things that trigger me? How can I not get triggered? How can I not have a response to that? I also highly recommend, cord cutting meditations. So a cord cutting meditation, 10 minutes is all you need to do. You can find guided ones all day long on YouTube. But what they're really great for is understanding the relationships you have with other people. Okay. And a cord cutting meditation, I like to do them several times. Like if there's something that's bothering me, or there's a situation or a person that I want to release, I do them several times. I like to do them at night before I go to bed, because I feel like it's kind of just like getting into my subconscious, into my psyche while I'm sleeping. So a cord cutting meditation is basically a visualization of Archangel Michael coming and cutting the energetic cord between you and that person. But here's the cool thing. It doesn't sever the relationship. It doesn't make you not love that person. That person can still be in your life and be a part of your life. What it severs is the emotional connection to the trauma or a trigger response. So it allows you to transmute that energy and let go of it, forgive yourself, and still have a good, solid relationship with that person.
I love those exercises. And it kind of brings me to this place of, what are some of the things that have stopped me from wanting to even be open to the idea that trauma could have been one of my biggest lessons? And like the first thing that comes, I'd love to hear you guys speak on this, but like the first thing that comes for me is being so attached to the idea that it never should have happened to begin with. Like I was putting so much energy into like we shouldn't live in this world. It shouldn't be this way. Like this is too painful, that I refuse to accept that it's already happened. It is the way it is. And by putting all my energy into that idea and like constantly fighting what already happened, I have no energy left to actually heal.
Right. So what if your soul, when you were incarnated onto this earth, this planet, this person that you are today, what if your soul, your higher consciousness, agreed in a contract with you that you aren't actually recognizing it now, but what if your soul agreed to be here on this planet at this time to go through this as part of the lesson for maybe healing generational trauma or generational karma? Because they said, Matthew, you're the person who needs to do this, because this has to be healed. So your soul is signing a contract to deal with this, even though you feel like that should have never happened. Well, sure, maybe it shouldn't have happened, but guess what? It's now being offered to you, and you can either fix it or you can walk away. And if you fix it, guess what? You get to, it's like, do not pass go, do not collect $200 in Monopoly, right? So when you say, okay, I will agree to fix this trauma, to transmute the generational past or the patterns that we've had in maybe your families or your culture or your society. If you can do that, then you can move up to the next level. You're going up that spiral, Yeah,
and along those same lines, like one of the biggest perspective shifts I ever had was the realization that I actually probably did choose my parents.
We all choose our parents.
Yeah,
like we do.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a pretty profound moment, and it was just like, okay, so this isn't happening to me. This is
Mhm.
happening for me. And
For
I set
you.
all this up. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. You set this up long before you ever, or even that microcosm inside your mom's womb. Like it happened long before that because it was part of the path. It doesn't negate free will because we all have free will, but it will course correct you if you're getting too far off the path by throwing you a curveball. And then that means, okay, I have another choice, another decision to make to go to figure out, okay, how do I move forward? And are you going to go up the spiral and learn that lesson again? Or are you going to go up and go, oh yeah, I see you coming. I know about that one.
And regardless of whether or not any of this is actually true, because I mean, it feels real to me, but who knows, right? Regardless of whether or not it's true, having that perspective of this is how it is now, this already happened.
Right.
Let's fix it instead of wasting time wishing it never did.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Truth is really what you believe. It's your own truth. Because my truth is not going to be the same as your truth, right? So truth is whatever truth is for you. Which,
exactly.
When you realize that, you're like, oh my gosh, that like gets me off the hook for so many things I've been beating myself up about, right?
And just for the record, this is not saying that like, oh, okay, so if truth is truth for me, then if I feel like it's okay to go out and kill 20 million people, then I just go out and kill 20 million people. Like that's not how this works.
Squares or circles. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
that would be really bad karma.
Yeah, like when I'm really tuned in to my truth, I find that even though it may not seem like it at first, whatever action happens turns out to be the most loving thing possible in that moment.
Right.
And there's only been one time that I can really point to where I can say that I actually felt drawn to violence. It was a very minor thing. I was dating a woman at the time, and she, like, we've been playing with a lot of things. One of the things we've been playing with is like this idea of like, well, sometimes a headache isn't just tension, it's actually an energetic attack. And a lot of times if you can tune in to whoever is attacking you, you can energetically tell them to stop and the headache goes away. And I've been playing with this a lot. And because I used to have like awful migraines, like just put me out like a light. Like I'd have to go to bed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon just because I couldn't function. They were so bad. And I realized a lot of times when they were happening, it was actually my mom. And so like I could tune in and be like, okay, Mom, I love you, but like,
get out of
please.
my head.
Exactly. And almost immediately,
like, you don't get to set up camp in my head or my heart or anywhere in my body, you know?
So like headache just gone. And one night I had this awful headache and I was just like, it didn't feel like I was doing it to myself, which that had also been the case a lot of times. It was like, I was like angry at myself for some reason. So I was energetically attacking myself. It didn't feel like it was that. It didn't feel like it was my mom. And I was just kind of tuning into everybody I could think of. Like, who could this be? And like, like the headache would stop for a couple of minutes and then it would come right back. And I finally mentioned this to the group because we were all sitting in the living room just kind of chatting. And Taya, the woman that I was with at the time, she just looks at me and she goes, oh, sorry, I'll stop. And immediately, headache was gone. I was like, okay.
Yeah. And so go ahead.
Yeah. So like what ended up happening is we all went to go to bed and, we always slept in separate rooms. Like it didn't matter what we were doing. Like for some reason, Tay and I, we just always had separate rooms. And so I was walking to go back to my room. And as I was getting ready to go outside, I had this just immediate draw, like just stop, turn around, walk back in the living room. And I walk back in and she's the only one there. She's laying on the floor, just kind of like spread out. And I had no earthly idea where this was, like I didn't want to do it. Like it felt like Matthew was scared to do it. I was scared to do it because but it was just like, no, this is like, go. And I kept tuning in. Like, is this actually the most loving thing? And it's like, yes, do it. So I walked up and I put my foot on her stomach. I didn't have shoes on or anything, but I just put my foot on her stomach. And I looked her dead in the eye and I said, you don't have to do this. You cannot do this to me. I will squash you. And she just got like this really like intense look in her face, and like the headache came back really strong, almost instantaneously. I just pushed down just a little bit on her stomach. I said, don't make me do it. And all of a sudden in that moment, everything just like, she snapped, everything broke. She like immediately apologized, walked, like it was like all the tension in the room just disappeared completely.
Yeah.
And it was just this really peaceful, amazing, beautiful space.
Yeah. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. It's really cool. I think a lot of people don't give things like psychic attacks, energetic attacks credit, and they are real. You know, you can project energy at people, things like that. So just be aware of it, because you know you don't ever want to impact somebody in a negative way. I have my bubble of protection that I use. I use them sometimes with clients. I use them with family. I use them every night when I go to bed, so that I have my bubble of protection around me, so that I don't get attacked by energy vampires or psychic attacks or any kind of negative energy. And so it's important that we all create that for ourselves. That's personal boundaries. So it's really important. And I think when you do a lot of these things, you'll find that trauma responses are going to be less, like they are not going to trigger you anymore and things like that. So I know we are just an hour here. We're coming right up onto an hour. So I wanted to say thank you so much, you guys, for having me on today. This was a great conversation. We probably could actually talk for like 3 hours.
I want you to come back and share some more, because this has been such a great conversation, Susie.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
I just acknowledge you for what you're up to, and just being that, you know, taking your experience and being that for others, giving them the tools to empower themselves, to their, you know, get those dandelions in the weeds, you know, get the nutrition from the things that are the scary experiences in our lives, and making it something beautiful for themselves and others. And I think that's so amazingly, so valuable, that the work that you do. So I really just honor you, and just thank you for being with us and sharing with us your story.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's awesome. I think it was a great conversation. You guys stay in touch for sure. Take care.
Before we sign out, I wonder, like, if you just take a minute and just share a little bit about finishthebookpublishing.com. I see you've got that website down there, and just kind of like give us a quick rundown, if you wouldn't mind.
So Finish the Book Publishing is my company, and I started it a few years back. I'd been working in the industry for a while, and I realized that I really wanted to just be able to do things the way I wanted to, because I don't really operate like a traditional publisher. So I said I want to do something different, a little bit rogue. So I help authors from the process of doing book visioning. I'm an intuitive as well, so I use a lot of my gifts when I'm working with authors. But we go anywhere from book visioning to getting them with an editor, helping them create the manuscript, go through the editing process, cover design, interior, getting them up on Amazon, creating a bestseller campaign for them, and just really helping authors launch their book, whether it's a memoir, legacy book, a business book, a personal journey, self-help, anything in the nonfiction arena is what I'll usually work with on authors. Many times what I do is I work with people who are, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants that might have a woo business, and they need a book because they need a little calling card or actually a product to sell. So I help them create the book that gets results and gives back to their community.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an honor to have you, Susie, very much so.
Thank you so much. I will see you guys very soon. Have a great day.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you so much. And for everyone tuning in, thank you for being with us. I want to take an opportunity just to invite you to share on this stage. You know, we really invite you. You have something unique. You have something unique to offer that, you know, impacts us all and contributes to us all. So I really want to invite you to share your story, your unique genius on our virtual stage. You can see the website on the bottom of the screen, and onedaymbmt.org/sharemygift. This space is for you to really shine your light into just to be a vulnerable and authentic, and how you discovered you. And, that's part of our one-day mission, is bringing you and me and communities together in joyous celebration, unifying humanity in our diversity to create a better world for us all. And our vision here at One Day is humanity rising in a connected world. Each person's unique contributions, gifts, and genius are being valued and magnified through a higher level of collaboration, producing unprecedented new realms of possibility. Thank you all for being with us. We are not going to have an episode next weekend because of the holiday, but I hope you all have a wonderful, whether you celebrate Thanksgiving or not, I hope you have a wonderful time with people you love, and I hope you are just to have a chance to be grateful for what you have, and to share that with others. But we love you all. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. And as always, everybody, one day is today. Peace, everybody. Take care.